Hello, Year 10. Welcome to my first attempt at recording a lesson. I just thought I would do this to move things on a little bit because we've done a lot of looking at the literature texts that you've already studied. So this is something new. We're going to be looking at the unseen poetry. Now, if you look at the slide that I've just clicked onto now, you will see it appears in paper 2 of your literature exam. Now, some students think because it's unseen poetry and you can't actually revise it because you don't know what it's going to be, that means you don't need to prepare at all. But that's a fallacy. You definitely can prepare very effectively for the unseen poetry part of the exam. You need to know what to expect and you need to know the best approach to take on the day of the exam. Now, it might be that you're completely stumped and you have no clue what the poem is about on the day. So you need to find a way of doing a response that does you justice and actually unlocks the meanings of those poems. Because examiners sometimes mean that students will panic and won't necessarily understand what they're being asked about. So what we're going to do over the next few weeks till the end of term is to look at a few examples of unseen poetry. Now this week I'm going to go through one example with you in a reasonable amount of detail, and I'm going to be asking you to make some notes of your own though before we start. So I won't know whether you're doing this, but when we get to this question, which is the one on the screen now, before you get to the part of the video where I go through the ideas that I came up with, I'd like you to pause it and see what you can come up with first, and then it will make it a lot more interesting to see the degree to which your ideas match with my ideas. Now, I was very careful there not to say to check whether you are right or wrong, because this isn't about right or wrong. People's responses to poems can be quite varied, and you can have two completely different responses, both of which are valid. So just because I have said something about a poem doesn't mean there's no validity in what you've said, even if it's completely different. Okay, so don't worry about that. The whole point of this is unlocking the meaning of the poem for you. Provided what you say links to the question, you will get credit for it. So we're going to be looking at these two poems here a little bit later on, First Day at School and The School in August, and there'll be some comparison. I want you to understand the best way to approach looking at unseen poetry. Now, you will probably recall me saying at some point I'm not a great fan of acronyms or mnemonics. They don't particularly help me. But of all the mnemonics I've seen, I think this is quite a useful one because it does quite succinctly sum up the things that you need to get to answer unseen poetry really well. The first step is always look at the question, identify what the main theme of the question is, because once you've done that, it will give you a huge clue as to what the main poem is about. Now, in this exam, you are given two poems to write about, but the first poem is the one that you should be spending a lot more time on, because the second poem is only worth a fraction of the marks. So your comparison part, which is the second part of the question, because you're given a first question focusing on the first poem and then a second comparison question where a second poem is introduced, that comparison is only worth 8 marks. So it's worth a lot less. It's still worth doing. You obviously don't leave it, but most of your writing should be based on the first poem and what you think about that. So you look at the question, you identify the key ideas from the question, and that will give you some ideas about what the main message of the poem is. And then you have to unpick what you think the writer is saying from the poem itself. Now, it could be that the voice in the poem, the narrator in the poem, is the poet, and you're hearing the poet's own thoughts. It might be that the voice in the poem is a created voice. So obviously we'll be looking at that in the example that we look at today. But you don't make assumptions. That's the key thing. Read the poem first, see if you can get your head around it, read it 2 or 3 times and see if you can work out what the perspective is and also what the tone is, because that can have a huge impact as well. Sometimes you might read a poem and not quite get the point of view it's coming from in terms of the tone, and misread what's being said. So it's really important that you're very careful that with the idea, the conclusions you come to about a poem. Don't immediately jump to a conclusion. Be prepared to change your mind when you've read it 2 or 3 times through. Now, whatever you do, once you've identified what the message is, what the attitudes and feelings are, you need to be able to support what you say. And that support involves finding examples of use of language and poetic techniques. So that can be structural techniques, rhyme scheme, the shape of the poem even, and to use all those ideas to support what you're saying. Okay, so as I said, we're going to look at a question together a little bit later on. Now, I just want to highlight a couple of things that have cropped up from exam boards about writing about poetry effectively in an exam. Now, if all you do is select quotations and produce an effective comparison, what you're looking at there is a mark at best at grade 4. If you analyse and develop your comparison more effectively, you're pushing up into 5/6. And obviously, at the very highest level, your analytical comparisons need to be very sophisticated. Now, ideas are everything when you are talking about these unseen poems. If you mechanically just work your way through picking out examples and saying what you think it means, but you don't answer the question, that will not get you a good response. It doesn't matter how many different examples you produce in your response. If it doesn't answer the question, you won't get the credit for it. So those very top marks, as you will all be aiming for, need to be sophisticated, analytical, but you need to link the ideas really well and show that you've really nailed what the poem means for you. So just a few do's and don'ts before we actually look at our example. The time you have in the exam it is a 2-hour 15-minute exam, but it's a relatively small amount of time to spend on the poems at the end. So you cannot cover everything you can think of in that poem. You need to be selective about the choices you make. It is much better to say a lot about a little. So if you have identified the key ideas, make sure that you pick a few examples to support those key ideas and include them in your response and develop it as much as you possibly can, linked back to the main focus of the question. So more depth is more important than simply trotting out example after example without relating it back to the question and developing it in any kind of detail. Try to not work to a tick list. It's much, much better if you keep your focus on the question and there's more of your words there than there are of sentence starters. Like my first example is, I know this because. Avoid all those piece things. I know we spent years drumming into you using piece and various things like that. They're fine as a way of reminding you of what you need to put in your answer, but try and vary your language and keep your style a little bit more fluid, so it's a bit more interesting for the examiner, because if you're interesting them, they're more likely to give you a good mark. And also, it's really much better, especially when you get to the end where you have to do the comparison poem, that you don't just talk about them separately. You try and do an integrated comparison between them, because that will get you a higher mark too. Okay, so just summarizing those things again there. So, as I said, we're going to start by looking at a poem you probably don't know. I want you to read the question and identify the key focus. I'll just correct the spelling there. And highlight the line or lines in the poem that you think sums up the key idea. So we're just looking at the first poem first. As I said before, there's not necessarily a correct answer. It doesn't matter which line you choose, provided you can say why and link it to something to do with the writer's ideas and methods. Okay, so I'm going to click onto the poem now. So we're looking first of all at first day at school. So what I would like you to do is pause the video now. So you can see the poem First Day at School, and you can see the question. So the question is, in First Day at School, how does the poet present the speaker's experience of school? Okay, so I'll repeat that. In First Day at School, how does the poet present the speaker's experience of school? So I'm going to read it first of all. Think about what I have said. Who is speaking? What's the tone? Is it the poet? Is it someone else? Can you work out who the speaker is from the way they speak? Give you a little bit of a clue there. How do they feel about what's happening to them on their first day at school? I will read it and then pause the video. First day at school. A million billion willion miles from home, waiting for the bell to go. To go where? Why are they all so big, other children, so noisy? So much at home they must have been born in uniform, lived all their lives in playgrounds, spent the years inventing games that don't let me in. Games that are rough, that swallow you up. And the railings, all around, the railings. Are they there to keep out wolves and monsters? Things that carry off and eat children? Things you don't take sweets from? Perhaps they're to stop us getting out, running away from the lessons. Lesson. What does a lesson look like? Sounds small and slimy. They keep them in the glass rooms, whole rooms made out of glass. Imagine! I wish I could remember my name. Mummy said it would come in useful, like wellies. When there's puddles. Yellow wellies. I wish she was here. I think my name is sewn on somewhere. Perhaps the teacher will read it for me. Teacher! The one who makes the tea. Okay, so that's the first reading through. If you'd like to pause the video and see what ideas you come up with. As you can see from the video now, I've moved on to my highlighting. Now, first of all, I've highlighted in red there in the question what the key focus is, which is the speaker's experience of school. And then I've identified things I have in common, and I've colour-coded them just for ease as we look at them together. So I think the main idea of this poem is it's all about a very young child who is finding the first day at school a little bit daunting and is a little bit lost. Now, I've broken it up into different examples there. So the first thing I've said is that we've got language examples that show that the school environment is one that feels threatening for a young child. So my examples there that I've highlighted in purple, all of which are questions, show that. Why are they all so big, other children? Are they there to keep out wolves and monsters? Things that carry off and eat children? Things you don't take sweets from? Now, all those are things that sound very horrific for a young child. And they also are, certainly the last three examples, things in childhood. You could imagine parents warning children about in their bedtime stories, keeping out wolves and monsters. And they are fears that very young children might have from reading fairy stories. Also, there's a little bit of stranger danger there in the last one, things you don't take sweets from, because children are quite often told not to take sweets from strangers. So I get the impression from all these questions, which are genuine questions, not rhetorical questions, that this child is very kind of wary of what's around in the school environment and is a little bit scared. And that certainly comes across quite a bit in those questions. And the kind of language that the poet has chosen to use there very much mimics the language that a young child might use, without actually using identifying necessarily precisely what has been said by the parent. You can almost hear the things that they've heard, perhaps from older siblings or from their parents at home in some of those things. The other thing that came across to me in this is how the poet presents the voice in the poem, which is the young child, as something that is very naive. Is very much emphasises how very, very young the child is. So the first example I highlighted there in yellow is the adjective million, billion, willion. But also, as well as the adjective, there are lots of examples in the poem of misunderstandings, which is shown in the use of language. So the second line there, waiting for the bell to go where? So this is a child who is so young, they only know the meaning of to go to mean to move from one place to another. They'd never heard it in reference to a bell, so there's a misunderstanding there. I didn't highlight it in yellow, but lower down we've got another couple of examples in the second stanza. They're running away from the lessons. This child doesn't know what a lesson is. Thinks it's some sort of creature or something that's small and slimy. And there's also, they've misheard the word classroom and think it's a glassroom. So very much this poet is trying to show how very, very young this child is, and those few examples there that you could have included. You don't, by the way, need to write about every example, just as much as you can in the time that's given to you. There's a kind of vulnerability as well that I highlighted in the final stanza there. Mummy said it would come in useful. That there's very much a need for adults to help. We've got this idea of calling for the teacher as well. Perhaps the teacher will read it for me. And then we've got the word teacher there in the very last line, almost as though the child is calling the teacher's name, teacher. But then we go back to the naivety of misunderstanding the word and thinks the teacher is somebody who makes the tea. But again, this idea of a vulnerable child who needs lots of support. So lots of examples in there of the way this poet, Roger McGough, has presented the character of this child and how very young they are. There's also, you will have noticed, I've highlighted little bits in green. They are examples of caesura where there's a break in the line. I haven't highlighted them all, but that kind of lack of certainty on the part of the child is emphasised by how some parts of the poem are quite hesitant, and using very short, broken sentences like that again emphasises the youth of the child. Okay, so that's question one of the poetry question, which I think is 27.1. Now, the second part of it involves you making a comparison. It's 27.2, which is only worth 8 marks, so it's worth a lot fewer marks than 27.1, but it's still worth doing. So what I would like you to do now is to pause the video once more and to see if you can look at this second poem, The School in August, which is quite different, and make some comparisons. Now, if you look at the question, it says, in both First Day at School and The School in August, the speakers describe their attitudes to school. What are the similarities and or differences between the way the poets present these attitudes? So you're just looking for a similarity and a difference if you can. Try to look at structural as well as ideas, structural points as well as ideas points and language points. Okay, it's 8 marks, as many things as you can do in the time you have left in the exam, and you will get some credit. But it is possible to get an 8-mark response and to do it really well. So I want to get you to the point where you are actually maximising the marks you're getting for 27.2. Don't just think, oh, it's only worth 8 marks, I won't bother. Okay, so I'm going to read the poem, and then when I finish reading it, please pause the video and see what you can come up with. The School in August. The cloakroom pegs are empty now, and locked the classroom door. The hollow desks are lined with dust and slow across the floor. A sunbeam creeps between the chairs till the sun shines no more. Who did their hair before this glass? Who scratched Elaine loves Jill, one drowsy summer sewing class with scissors on the sill. Who practice this piano, whose notes are now so still? Ah, notices are taken down and score books stowed away, and seniors grow tomorrow from the juniors today. And even swimming groups can fade. Game mistresses turn grey. Okay, so you like to pause the video and see what you can come up with. Okay, so hopefully you will have had a go at coming up with some comparison ideas. Can I say, before I go through these comparison ideas, that there is no expectation at all for you to cover the number of points I've got here. I've just put as many examples as I could fit on the page just to show you what you could have said. So please don't panic and think, well, I didn't come up with any of that. If you can come up with one example for language and one for structure, that would be brilliant. Okay, so first of all, I think the key thing is to have an overall comparison. So if you think about the 2 poems, they're obviously both about time spent in school, but they're almost they are from entirely different perspectives. So first day at school is obviously from this perspective of a very, very young child, and it is literally their first day in school. Okay, now it seems pretty clear from some of the content that the school in August is a secondary school because of some of the things that are mentioned. Particularly the reference to the sewing class and Elaine loves Jill scratched into the windowsill with scissors. Definitely seems like much older, and we've got references to seniors and juniors as well in the last stanza as well. Okay, so that's your kind of overall comparison. It's always useful to come up with an overall comparison. Now, language examples, I've just picked a couple out, but should have really started with B first, but I didn't. I started with A. So A is both use questions. Now, that's something they have in common. However, if you look at the questions, they're quite different. So in first day at school, the questions are not rhetorical. They require answers. This is a young child with an inquiring mind who is really wondering about everything around them and what it all means. It's somebody who is completely in a world that they haven't been in before and is confused by it. Whereas the questions in the school in August are all rhetorical, and they're all about focusing on the contrast between the school now and how busy it was when all the students were in term time. So, who did their hair before this class? So, who practiced the piano, whose notes are now so still? So it's the questions are used rhetorically to suggest the contrast between the liveliness of the school in term time and the contrast with how quiet it is now that everybody has left. Okay. Now the second language point, I always say to students, if you can't see metaphors and similes and the obvious language features that you're trained to spot, look at the word choice. And that's to do with semantic field. So if you look at the poems and look for the kinds of words that crop up again and again and again, first day at school is full of words that emphasize threat. So from the point of view of the child, there's a lot there that they find very threatening. So we've got so big, so noisy, wolves and monsters, carry off and eat children. So there's lots there you can talk about that suggests threat. Whereas in the school in August, we've got words that suggest emptiness. So pegs are empty now, hollow desk, the sun shines no more, taken down, stowed away. It's all about things not there anymore. Okay, so obviously quite different in word choice, which is a contrast. Now, I always suggest to classes that when you're in the exam, if you can possibly talk about a structural feature, that is a good thing to do. Now, the obvious thing about these two poems is they both consist of 3 stanzas. You could talk about that representing the different times of the day if you wanted and say that's a similarity. But I would try and make a structural point that is a little bit more impactful. So what I wanted to focus on is the use of rhyme. Now, if you look at the first day at school, there is no clear rhyme scheme. In fact, I'm not even sure there's a single rhyme in the whole thing. Let me just correct my spelling of scheme there. And I think that is appropriate because the school feels chaotic for the child, and the lack of a rhyme scheme echoes the feelings of the child. Now, school in August is a little bit different because there is rhyme. If you look, you will see that every second line, all the even numbered lines in each stanza rhyme with each other, whereas the odd numbered lines don't rhyme. Now, if you were being really clever about that, you possibly could suggest that the rhyme suggests the routine of term time, where everything follows a timetable. So the even rhymes represent term time, and then the odd rhymes represent the school in August. The fact that that's not there anymore, so the rhymes have disappeared for those first lines as well, to show the contrast between school in term time and school in August. But as I say, there's a lot of points there that you could have possibly picked up in your response. Hopefully you'd have spotted some of them or other much better responses. So my task for you, other than following this lesson through, is now to have a go at answering both those full questions. So there they are on the page. So 27.1, in first day at school, how does the poet present the speaker's experience of school? I want you to write as full a response as you can in the time available. Now, in the exam, that would be about 45 minutes in total for both questions. I'm not suggesting that you do it under exam conditions, but you might want to try that, which would mean probably spending about 35 minutes answering 27.1. And then 27.2, the comparison question. In both first day at school and the school in August, the speakers describe their attitudes to school. What are the similarities and or differences between the way the poets present these attitudes? Now, don't worry, I will have sent, I haven't done it yet, but I will send with the email with this video all the ideas I've had on the screen there on separate paper resources, obviously digitally, so you can get them up on the screen and refer to them. So don't worry about scribbling down loads of notes and going back. You will have them there available to you. Now, you can use them if you want while you do your response, or you can try and just do your own response and use the notes that you made. Entirely up to you. But what I do want is to see those responses, because I would like to do some marking and give you some feedback on it at some point next week. So I'm going to give you the full week. So if from next Monday, which is, let me just get my calendar on here. So the 6th of July, if you can get your responses to me by the 6th of July, that would be great, and I will try and give you some feedback on those. But that's not everything. So obviously you spent some time looking at this video, you've had a go at making your own notes, and you're going to do your own full response. The second part of what I would like you to do this week is to look at this second pair of poems and plan your ideas from scratch. So follow exactly the same process that I've just gone through with the first two poems and just see what you can come up with. Now, in next week's video, I will be going through this in detail and then obviously introduce the next pair. Okay, so I would love to see your ideas for these as well. I won't ask you to submit them. Obviously, at some point you will be doing a full response to these two poems as well. But if you're going to learn anything from this, you need to try and apply some of the ideas I've suggested to you to poems on your own without being spoon-fed exactly what to say. So just have a go, see what you come up with. If you want to share those with me as well, I'd be delighted to see them. But I really must see your responses to the first, and I will be chasing up anybody who doesn't send those in. You can handwrite them, take a photograph and send the photograph. You can type up your responses on a Word document and attach it. Either way is fine, and I will give you some feedback. If I don't receive your responses, I will make sure I'll be ringing home to try and find out what's going on. So please have a go. There's no excuse, because if you're not happy with the notes you came up with, there are some notes on this video, and I will provide a digital copy of the notes to help you to do your own response. Okay, I hope that all that has made sense and it's been useful, and good luck. As ever, I will be available to check emails 24/7, so if you've got any problems with anything I've said and need any clarification, please let me know. Don't just not do it, because that isn't really an option. Okay, thanks for your time. See you soon.